Good afternoon. My name is Anita Farrington. I'm the Associate Dean of Student Affairs at NYU Tandon School of Engineering, and I would like to welcome you to our sixth annual Diversity in STEM Summit. Our theme this year is Inclusive Innovation, Impacting the Future of STEM. First, before we begin, we have so many guests in the audience. I just first want to do a warm Tandon welcome to our presenters, to our students. You are almost at the finish line. I know you've been working very hard this semester. Thank you for taking the time out. To our faculty, and we have some alumni that are joining us, as well as corporate colleagues who have decided to have lunch with us today. So thanks to all of you. So at our three featured summit events, we are going to be exploring what inclusive innovation in STEM really means, which is the intention to address the needs and the wants and the problems of those who historically were not included. So just envision this, for example, creating a future where we imagine and build technology that actually mirrors the people in a society for whom we build, both locally and globally. Inclusive innovators are committed to doing the work, and it's very, very hard work. They're committed to improving access and career opportunities in their organizations, and they are committed to breaking down silos. Our first event, Inclusive Innovators to Watch, are indeed changing the mindset in their respective fields, in cutting edge research, in solar energy, artificial intelligence, finding real solutions to food waste, and promoting an efficient green building industry. Now, before we introduce you to our presenters, I first have the pleasure of introducing you to the Dean of NYU Tandon School of Engineering, Yelena Kovacevic, and she has a very special welcome message for us.
Hello, I'm pleased to be welcoming you today, albeit virtually, to our annual Diversity in STEM Summit. And I want to take a moment right at the start to acknowledge that we would not be here without the efforts of Associate Dean for Student Affairs, Anita Farrington. It was Anita who first had the idea for the summit 6 years ago, and she has presided over it ever since. The summit has been a wonderful way to further our school's efforts to attract and retain students from demographic groups currently underrepresented in the STEM fields. And it has helped us highlight the importance of diverse, collaborative teams in solving the world's most pressing issues. So, Anita, thank you for what has become one of the most eagerly awaited occasions on the school calendar, as well as one of the most important ones. I am thrilled that the theme of this year's summit is inclusive innovation, because to me, that seems to perfectly capture what makes NYU Tandon so special. As an engineering school, we're in the rare position of being able to not only provide an education to our students, regardless of where they come from, their ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, or socioeconomic background, but to also use our research prowess to actually create opportunity for all people. Developing technology that contributes to society in some way has always been a major part of our ethos. And among the biggest contributions we are now making is to create systems and devices that open doors for all and promote access to healthcare, employment, transportation, and so much more. In other words, we want to engineer opportunity in every possible way. You're going to hear from some of our professors during the summit, and they'll explain their focus on building technology that mirrors the people and societies it serves, and the vital need to rethink traditional approaches in STEM disciplines. I'll just take a moment here to discuss the work of a few of our researchers who are doing to measure various disparities, increase accessibility for the differently abled, and open world-changing possibilities in sometimes unexpected ways. For example, our C2 Smart Research Center is making transportation more accessible and equitable by collaborating with the New York City MTA's accessible station lab for subways, creating an on-demand tool to support senior mobility, and studying how women may be paying a premium for transportation in urban environments, the so-called pink tax. Yuri Dworkin, an assistant professor of electrical and computer engineering, is working to increase the resiliency of the power grid because, as he's discovered, outages all too often disproportionately affect already vulnerable populations. And I could go on, of course. Faculty members in every department and at every research center are providing that opportunity-centered tech is one key to a more equitable and diverse future. We can't talk about the future without talking about our students, because they're also key. Back in 1854, when the small Polytechnic Institute that was the precursor to NYU Tandon opened its doors, the ambitious first-generation Americans who flocked to the school hailed from places like Italy, Germany, Poland, and Russia, and they used their engineering education as a stepping stone to the middle class and beyond. Now, new generations of Pell-eligible students, who are in many cases the first in their immediate families to attend college, continue to arrive at our doors and be welcomed. Our Inclusion Attendant Committee has created a far-reaching strategy that incorporates K-12 efforts and career pipeline initiatives, establishes an atmosphere of support for each and every student attendant, and attracts a diverse faculty eager to serve as mentors. I probably don't have to tell anyone here how important that is, because solving the world's problems requires a diversity of perspectives, lived experiences, and intellectual capital, and that can only happen in a diverse, vibrant environment where people from different backgrounds collaborate. And if anyone ever tries to tell you that increasing diversity means sacrificing academic excellence, we've got the numbers to prove them wrong. NYU Tandon has continued its rise in the rankings, leapfrogging into the top 40 in the US News and World Report over the last few years, to name just one important metric. And that happened at the same time we were attracting almost twice the percentage of women students than the average US engineering school. I'll begin to wrap up because I know you're all eager to get to the main event. But let me just close by telling you how hopeful and happy I feel right now, thanks to each of you. It's wonderful to know that so many people are focused on these important issues and are working hard to improve the future. Please enjoy the rest of the summit, and I hope next time I'll be greeting you in person.
Thank you so much, Dean Yelena. Thank you so much for your kind words. I'm very, very touched. Now, this afternoon, we have 5 amazing presenters, and they're all inclusive innovators. They are going to be introduced by our Tandon students. We will hear from all presenters first and then have a Q&A at the end of the presentations. So please utilize the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen throughout to ask questions. And very important, please indicate which presenters your questions are directed to. So let's begin. I now first would like to ask Tandon student Anissa Fernandez to introduce our first and second speakers.
Hello. Thank you, Dean Farrington. I'm very, very excited to be here. So again, I am Anissa Fernandez. I'm a second-year master's student studying biomedical engineering here at Tandon. I am currently your Tandon Graduate Student Council president and also serve on the board of the Biomedical Engineering Society here at Tandon. Now I am honored to introduce our first speaker, one of our very own, Dr. Montclair. So Jen Kim Montclair is a professor in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering who's performing groundbreaking research in engineering proteins to mimic nature and, in some cases, work better than nature. She works to customize artificial proteins with the aim of targeting human disorders, drug delivery, and tissue regeneration, as well as create nanomaterials for electronics. Using multidisciplinary expertise in chemistry and genetic engineering, these results have already been realized. Prior to joining NYU Tandon, Montclair was a postdoctoral fellow at the California Institute of Technology in the Division of Chemistry and Chemical Engineering. She received a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from Fordham University in 1997, a Master of Science and a PhD in Bioorganic Chemistry from Yale University in 2001 and 2003, respectively. Among her many honors and awards are the AAAS Leshner Fellowship, AIMBE Fellow, ACS Rising Star Award, Agnes Faye Morgan Research Award from Iota Sigma Pi, Executive Leadership in Academic Technology and Engineering Fellowship, American Chemical Society Progress Dreyfus Lectureship, the Dreyfus Special Grants Program Award, the Air Force Office of Scientific Research Young Investigator Award, the Weschler Award for Excellence, the Othmer Junior Fellow Award, the National Institute of Health Postdoctoral Fellowship, and of course, the National Science Foundation Predoctoral Fellowship. Montclair is the author of numerous papers for referred journals, colloquia, and seminars, and holds several patents. She is a member of the American Chemical Society, the International Society for Pharmaceutical Engineering, the Biophysical Society, the Materials Research Society, the Biochemical Society, the Protein Society, and American Association of Cancer Research, and the American Institute of Chemical Engineers. Welcome, Dr. Montclair.
Thank you, Anissa. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully get to the right slide. So let me see. Do you see my slide? Yes? Yes. Okay. So let me just give me a minute. Slideshow, play from start. Okay. So thank you for having me. For this talk, because it's mostly students, what I wanted to do was share my K-20 experience and the importance of mentors, and then talk about the importance of K-12 years and our work with outreach and with technology. Then I'd like to talk about entrepreneurship because that's something that I'm passionate about, and I would like the students to know about the opportunities and specifically how we're trying to increase women and diversity. And then finally, the work that we're doing to address the pandemic currently and specifically to address disparities. So before I begin with the K-12 work, I just want to share with you this slide based on the US Census population, in which we look from 2000 to 2019, the total US population, and we can see that there is an increase in diversity in terms of ethnic groups aside from white Americans. And as we're going from 2000 to 2019, the numbers are increasing not only in the total US population, but those who are under the age of 16, actually the numbers of diversity is increasing significantly relative to the total US population. And so this is what is happening now. Sorry, let me move forward. I'm trying to move forward, but I can't. There you go. But then what I wanted to share with you is this slide, in which we look at the race ethnic profile for students, specifically from the master's and the PhD level, where we're seeing that it's predominantly white Americans. And then you have these other ethnic profiles or ethnic populations that are significantly less, and actually significantly less than the demographics of the US census, right? The total US population. And as Anissa mentioned, I actually started my PhD and completed it sometime here, and I'm an Asian Pacific Islander, and so I'm part of that percentage. And so I'm a case study in that case for how I came to be as a professor. So I am an immigrant, meaning my parents immigrated to this country. I'm a first generation. I was actually born here, and they immigrated to this country, had me and my brother, and we were located in the Bronx, and we grew up. I was literally raised by my grandmother because both my parents had to work full time in order to feed us. And so this was my story. And my story began with my K-12 mentors and other mentors as I proceeded in my career. So from K-12, I had my high school teacher, Ihor Skolar. Then I went to Fordham University, located in the Bronx, not too far from my home. And I had a number of mentors, Jim Chacho, Dr. Saba and Beer. I then did research at Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the genetics department with Raju Kuchulapati, who's now at Harvard. And then when I came to Yale, I worked with my first role model that was actually a female, Alana Sheparts, in the chemistry department. And she was the first tenured professor there. I then went to California, worked with Dave Terrell, and then I came here to NYU. So when I think about how I entered this, I think about what influenced me most in this pathway, and I think it was my high school teacher, and it was the case 12 years. And so because of that, and growing up in the Bronx, I realized that K-12 is a crucial time, and it's important to get students engaged. And just like you're at NYU, you're studying STEM fields, you can give back. And so I thought, as I started as a professor here, to give back and start to develop a relationship with the K-12 community so that I can see more diversity in our university. So in terms of the way we decided to go about this, we developed an outreach program called Science Outreach and Research. And this was started in the collaboration with the Urban Assembly Institute, which is right across from NYU Tandon. And we developed, what we wanted to do was integrate technology with the learnings, with the education of these middle school and high school students. And so we developed an app called Lewis Dots. And we have a whole slew of graduate students, undergraduate students, as well as postdocs working to engage the high schools or the local middle schools and use technology to get them interested in STEM and then hopefully continue on in their path. And so the people here below are, I'm going to have some slides, and I'll always acknowledge the people who are working with me on this. And this is Priya, Kamya, Bonnie, Julia, and Andrew. And they've been working not only with the UAI, but other schools as well, which I'll share with you in a little bit. But then what happened was my graduate student, Carlo Yuvienko, was helping me out with outreach, and we're doing this with K-12 STEM. He was interested in developing this as a technology platform to educate K-12 STEM and perhaps develop a company. And so this is where we got interested in working with the National Science Foundation. We were funded, and we went through the I-Corps program. And essentially it's a startup boot camp using Lean Launchpads. And what we had to do was we had to undergo 108 customer interviews. And we realized that just an iPad app would not be sufficient to implement in K-12 situations, in part because not all schools have iPads, right? Schools have computers, but not necessarily iPads. And so we decided to pivot and start off with that Lewis Dots iPad app, but change it to lab lessons, and they started the company in school apps. We also had an entrepreneurial mentor, Andrew Cohen, who is the CEO of Brainscape, who helped us a lot in this whole process. So Lab Lessons is a technology that we have developed. It's an online pre-lab preparation for students to set them up before they go into the laboratory. And we piloted this with Brooklyn Technical High School, and we've actually published. So those people that are part of this group, I've had in the years that I've been here at NYU Tandon, I've had a number of undergraduates, graduate students, and we publish the work that we do in terms of outreach. So this is something that's not only you can give back, but you can actually get some acknowledgement for doing that work. And so we've done this, and we're continuing to work with them as well as other schools, and because it's a pandemic currently, it's actually really important that we provide schools online education because that's what's happening currently. So then what happened was I realized that more and more of my students and more of the students that I taught were interested in innovation and entrepreneurship. And in 2014, we took a look at what was existing in terms of the entrepreneurship or innovation landscape at NYU. We saw things like incubators and competitions and funding for students and faculty. We also saw Greenhouse, which was student design and run, and then a whole litany of clubs that foster innovation and entrepreneurship. However, there was something that was lacking: curriculum, students, and faculty. And so we, a group of us faculty and administrators, started the Convergence for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And as part of that, our mission is to increase diversity in STEM entrepreneurship and provide guidance as well as resources to STEM innovators and to start up. And so we've done a number of things. Some of our achievements are setting up or establishing the capstone competition in 2016. Because of the pandemic, we had to pause that, but hopefully once we have all the vaccines in and people are back, we'll be able to continue that. We also have a VentureWell funded pre-capstone course that started in 2017. And then we were awarded the National Science Foundation iCourse Sites Award, which allowed us to train students, faculty, and staff on entrepreneurship. And so my team here, James Perez, Lillian Wang, Dustin Britton, and Francesca Lavini, have been working to roll out all of these opportunities. And then we're actually studying how different ways or how we can approach entrepreneurship so that we can engage more diverse population. So I can say that we had a hypothesis when we started this. It was that STEM entrepreneurship that is geared towards social goals would be more appealing to all students and women in particular. And that was borne out in our teams. So in 2017, our first cohort, we had 30 teams, 19 that finished, 54% were women and underrepresented. Now we're through 2019, and we can see that the third cohort, we're seeing 13 teams and 15 teams with 75% and 51% women underrepresented, and even in the faculty level, with 8 teams, 79% are women and underrepresented. And from that cohort, from all of those cohorts, we've had 6 teams participate in that national I-Corps program that Carlo Yuvienko had participated. And so we're encouraging, at least I and all of us are encouraging you guys to think about taking the stuff that you're learning in your classrooms or in your research programs, and then seeing whether you can take it to market. And we have all the resources to help you. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is my research. But before I talk about that, is I want to share with you how COVID has impacted us and how we, at least in my research group, have started to take a bite at this and try to help in this situation. So December 31st, you had pneumonia-like disease reported in Wuhan, and then the Chinese CDC investigated this further and found evidence of cases as far back as November 17 in Hubei. And then in January 12, China shares this genetic sequence of COVID-19. On the 13th, the first reported case outside of China was happening in Thailand. On the 20th, the first confirmed case in US happened. And then March 1st, there was a first case in New York City where we live. And then March 11th, the World Health Organization declared COVID a complete pandemic. So I'm showing you what happens after that and in terms of research in our lab. So on March 16th, we shut down our labs to help flatten the curve, right? Because we're getting increasing cases. And then on March 22nd, we decided, okay, we have all of this PPE and there was a shortage of PPE. So we decided to collect all the PPE and donate it to the hospitals. But you know, doing that was not enough. And so we wanted to use our research and knowledge to be able to address this COVID health crisis. And just as of yesterday, if we look at the COVID dashboard at Johns Hopkins University, there are 63 million cases worldwide, right? And US is at the top of that leaderboard with 13 million cases. And globally, the deaths are 1.4 million and rising. So if we look at this, we see that the other countries, India, Brazil, Russia, are also on the rise as well. But if we just look at our backyard in Brooklyn, we see that there's a discrepancy on who is actually getting COVID, right? So East Flatbush residents are 91.4% Black. And so data is beginning to show that Black Americans living predominantly in Black neighborhoods are 1.24 times likely to be diagnosed with COVID-19 and 1.18 times more likely to die. So there's these health disparities that are then concentrated with Black Americans, where they're now suffering with more cases of COVID-19. And that's a disparity that we don't want to happen, right? So what we decided to do was we thought about this problem. We thought, okay, we needed something rapid and cheap, and we need some type of point of care test or POC test. And so we thought about this problem, and we thought, maybe we can generate a simple lateral flow assay, just like a pregnancy test. This would allow us to get confident results. You have, we'll talk about what the protein is, because that's my area of expertise. You'll have it more accessible, lower costs, so that you can do it at home. And then you can have regular use, that there would be no need for you to go to a hospital to get your test. You can do this all at home and no specialized equipment. So then what we did was we had this idea. We actually sent it to the National Academy of Engineering, and then we started our lab. We started to open up our lab again, try to start this research, and that happened in May 19th, shown here. So here is the progress of where we are. Our rapid home test is for COVID infection and immunity, not only to test that you are infected, but whether you are immune or you have the antibodies to the virus. And the idea is you would take a fast finger prick of blood or sputum sampling, and then this will undergo in a lateral flow assay through a strip. And then we have engineered a multivalent engineered protein that can recognize antibodies, and that will be used to detect the virus as well as the antibody, and then we can achieve rapid test results. And so far we've generated that highly sensitive protein, and so we're in the works towards this. And this was done by a group of people with ideas coming through Dustin Britton, Kamya Punya, Farbad Mahmoud Dinabar, Stanley Chu, Jacob Cronenberg, and Priya Kachal. So then, so that's it. I want to acknowledge all the students in my lab. This is only one part of a lot of things that we're doing, but I wanted to give you a sense of how I'm thinking in terms of equity and inclusion and in terms of innovation. So thank you.
Jen, thank you so very much for this incredible research. Thank you for sharing it with us. And again, and I personally know the kind of work that you've been doing over the years in terms of K through 12. I remember hosting those 10-year-olds in their white lab coats who were just so unbelievably precocious, and just so heartwarming to see that you persisted with that. Thank you. So, Anissa, please come back, because you are going to be introducing our next presenter. Anissa?
Hello again. Thank you, Dean Farrington. So up next, I am humbled and thrilled to introduce our second speaker, Professor Zaman. Mohammed Ahmed Zaman is a Howard Hughes Medical Institute professor of biomedical engineering at Boston University. A major research theme in his lab focuses on developing solutions to improve access to quality care in low-income settings, including in refugee settlements. In addition to over 130 peer-reviewed research articles, he has also authored 2 books for broad audiences. His first book, Bitter Pills, published by Oxford University Press in 2018, looks at the global challenge of substandard and counterfeit drugs. His second book, Biography of Resistance, published this year by HarperCollins, is focused on global antimicrobial resistance. It is a story of science and evolution that looks to history, culture, attitudes, our own individual choices, and collective human behavior in creating one of the biggest public health challenges of our time. Professor Zaman has also developed research and education programs focusing on refugee health at Boston University. He co-founded the university-wide initiative on forced displacement in collaboration with academic, public, and private sector partners in Lebanon, Uganda, and Colombia. Professor Zaman has written extensively on innovation, refugee, and global health in newspapers around the world. His newspaper columns have appeared in over 30 countries and have been translated into 8 languages. He has won numerous awards for his teaching and research, the most recent being the Guggenheim Fellowship this year for his work on antibiotic resistance in refugee camps. Welcome, Professor Zaman.
Thank you so much, Anissa, and thank you so much, Dean Farrington, for giving me this tremendous opportunity to talk to students and colleagues. Really appreciate it. And so I'm going to take a slightly different, let me just track and not talk as much about my research as the focus is going to be more about engagement with the public, broadly speaking, and what I have learned and what are some of the important things. Before I start, I want to sort of talk about 2 things. One is the need and the necessity of scholars of engineering to really interact with colleagues outside our disciplines. We live in a society which is polarized, which is bifurcated, and there's a need and a role that all of us have to play in creating a society that works for everyone. And this means that engineers have to sort of go out of their domain, have to go out of their sort of labs and sort of work with people all across the country and beyond. That takes me to my second point, is thinking of this as a global society and doing exactly the same at a global level as well. What I'm going to talk about today is my recent book, Biography of Resistance, and thinking about what history can teach us in terms of current and future pandemics. History is something that is often not taught to our engineering students, and I think that's a shame. Not only is it important for us to know where we are and where we have come from, but it is absolutely essential to understand where we are headed. It is also important to recognize that there were many people, brilliant men and women all across the world, who were not born with a silver spoon. And through effort and help of mentors and colleagues, they were able to really make an impact. And finally, I think our students need to recognize that they are part of a long tradition of scholarship, of curiosity, of doing work with integrity, and recognize how privileged and how fortunate they are to be learning at an institution like NYU. And that comes with a tremendous responsibility to really bring a positive change in the lives of those who are all around us. So as we think about COVID-19 and the current pandemic, I want us to go back about 102 years and think about another pandemic that really sort of brought the world to its knees. About 50 million people died, 40% of those in a country that I grew up in. So I grew up in Pakistan, but at that time it was India, and about 40% of those people, about 20 million, died there. The reason I bring it up today is not because of the fact that we've lived through challenging times before and there's a lot to learn, but also because of a connection between viruses and bacteria. In 2008, a paper showed that it was not just the virus that led to this widespread mortality and morbidity. It was actually a combination of virus and bacteria. And what I want to draw your attention to is the name of the senior author on this paper, a name that we have learned to see and appreciate for his honest feedback and leadership. And in this time, somebody also who grew up in New York. Dr. Fauci and his team use the diaries of doctors, clinical reports, but also tissue samples that have been preserved for about 100 years to demonstrate that it was actually bacterial infection combined with the viral infection that really caused this widespread damage. And this thing was sort of captured in other studies as well. So it's important for us to recognize this in the context of the current pandemic. that we may be getting out of the shadows through this vaccine, but we cannot be complacent, because bacterial infection sort of lurking just right behind viral infection can be problematic. And certainly in places around the world where you have challenges associated with hygiene, with lack of antibiotics, and with sort of poor healthcare access. So why do I write? That is not something that people do in engineering. They would write brilliant papers and research articles, but not necessarily for a broad audience. And the reason I do that is what I mentioned earlier, is to be able to engage with people and learn from people all around me, whether it is my daughter's high school teacher or my neighbor or my aunt or a friend's uncle. I want us to be conversant in a way that allows us to push back against conspiracy theory, push back against anti-vax notions, push back against sort of thought that is driven not by scientific evidence. And it's important that scientists and engineering scholars do that. And that's one of the reasons I write. But I also write because it gives me an opportunity to learn from brilliant men and women who have sort of gone in the past and have really sort of shaped our lives for the better. The history of antibiotic resistance is very much sort of a theme in that regard. Many of us have heard sort of the great story of Alexander Fleming. So Alexander Fleming going on a vacation and leaving a window open, and then sort of mold that was sort of came to the petri dish, and the mold had a drug that eventually became penicillin. The story is fantastic. The story is very interesting. Unfortunately, most of it is not true. There was absolutely no way he would have left that window open, because that window was well behind several benches, and nobody would leave that window open, given that it was sort of opening into a very, very noisy street. Most likely it came through the doors, as historians now believe. But it's important to recognize how fact and fiction combine to create these fantastic stories. It's not to take anything away from Sir Alexander Fleming, who was certainly a very capable microbiologist, but it's also important for us to recognize where the facts are and how to think about those. Speaking of facts, we have started to take for granted that the history of microbiology or the history of antibiotics is the history of these brilliant men. Unfortunately, if you look deep, you actually don't even have to look deep. You have to recognize that the history that has been told is problematic, because some of the greatest names in antibiotic resistance came actually not from men, but from these brilliant women. The one whose name I really hope we all will recognize, or if we don't recognize, we'll pay attention to it and read some of her work, is Dr. Mary Barber. So Dr. Mary Barber is this brilliant microbiologist and a clinician working in London, and her papers are just a couple of pages long, but just absolutely, absolutely wonderful to read. And in a page and a half, she sort of lays out the case of why penicillin actually is developing resistance. This is happening in 1947, just a year after Sir Alexander Fleming got his Nobel Prize. And she clearly says that it is obvious that the main cause for this increase in penicillin-resistant strains of staph is the widespread use of penicillin, although patient yielding such an organism may not himself have ever had any. Very clearly laying out that, look, overuse of penicillin is not only causing resistance, but it is causing cross-resistance as well. Another name that comes to mind are two Australian clinicians, Dr. Phyllis Roundtree and Dr. Claire Isbister, and they were the ones who really created the modern hygiene system in hospitals and infection control that is used in nearly all hospitals around the world, including those in New York as well. Again, these are people who helped sort of create the modern microbiological system of infection control in the hospitals. And then Dr. Patricia Javins, again from the United Kingdom, was the one who sort of really raised the alarm against MRSA, sort of antibiotic resistant infection that we are still struggling to address today. So remember that penicillin comes and penicillin becomes resistant, and another drug comes and that becomes resistant. And there's a sense among people that we will live forever in this honeymoon period. There'll always be a new drug. And that's not quite what's happening. So this sort of miracle drug of early 1960s called methicillin, also known as calbenin. And Dr. Patricia Javan says, well, not quite. It is well known that patients with infected skin can be a dangerous source of infection in hospitals, and the finding of such a patient infected with a calbenin-resistant strain in this instance adds additional warning. These are the people who have really sort of, in the 50s and 60s, shaped antibiotic resistance research. And we didn't pay attention to a lot of the things that they said, but that doesn't take away from the fact that they were these remarkable scientists who allowed us to have a little bit of a runway so we could come up with better policies. One of the other things that I want to talk about in terms of antibiotic resistance is that one common misconception is that it is something that has just happened in the last 100 years. And the reason that is important to recognize that that is not true is because it sort of is an inaccurate picture. Antibiotic resistance has been there from the very beginning. It is the human behavior that has tipped the balance. So think about it this way, that if there was only, so you have bacteria in the soil, one bacteria sort of develops antibiotics and starts to kill its competition. And then there are other bacteria that develop a resistant mechanism. And that's why you have a whole sort of this diversity of bacteria. And you don't have a single bacteria. You have sort of this tension, this tug of war going on in that regard. And that's why nature has always had it. But the real evidence for that came from the work of two scholars, one of them, Professor University of Akron, Dr. Hazel Barton, and another one in Canada, Dr. Jerry Wright. And they did a very sort of, I think, elegant experiment where they went, Dr. Hazel Barton, who is sort of a cave microbiologist, went into these long caves in New Mexico where nobody had gone before. These caves are millions of years old. So she scoops up the dirt and the sort of surface of these deep caves, and they bring it back, and they find that some of the bacteria there are resistant to some of the front line antibiotics, demonstrating clearly that antibiotic resistance has been there from the very, very beginning. It is sort of the hubris of our actions and our lack of sort of attention to scientific findings that is sort of really tipping the balance and making it much harder. I'll come to that point in a few minutes. One of the things that we have to understand if we think of diversity and if we think of sort of global inclusion is a recognition that we have created these caricatures, these sort of pictures in our mind of who's responsible for antibiotic resistance, and oftentimes the burden lies on patients. So we think of the situation where you would have that prescribed an antibiotic for 5 or 7 days and you took it only for 3 days, or you were just not being careful, or there was a doctor who was overprescribing. All of that is true, but that's an incomplete picture. One of the most important aspects of antimicrobial resistance that is developing in low-income countries is conflict. So in early 2000s, in the second US-led Gulf War, there was emergence of an antimicrobial resistant bacteria called, so broadly speaking, it started being called Iraqi bacter, right? So because it emerged in Iraq, that's not the technical name for it, but the idea was that the technical name is Acinetobacter baumannii, but it was called Iraqi bacter because it was affecting sort of the US servicemen and women in Iraq. The US servicemen and women came back. Most of them survived or did okay. The bacteria has become endemic in the region. In Lebanon and Iraq, nearly everybody who gets a trauma gets affected by this bacteria. Kids who are born well after the war ended are affected by that. They were not bad patients. They were not bad doctors. So we really have to think about sort of the global inclusion and the global impact of these things. There was a report on the cover on the front page of CNN about a year and a half ago where it said the U.S. defeated Kabul's the U.S. defeated Kabul, superbugs in its military, but the locals still struggle. And sort of the problem continues elsewhere as well. And it's not just the sort of the US-led war. We've seen that in Ukraine and elsewhere as well. So people who have nothing to do, have done nothing wrong, get caught up in this and are really sort of on the receiving end of these very, very difficult and complicated challenges. And there's something that we as engineering faculty and students and staff have to think about is how do we come up with solutions? No single technology is going to address it. We have to address this in the context of the system and be inclusive, not just in terms of sort of the global inclusion, but also inclusive of various disciplines, and really appreciate the challenges that people who do not have any political or financial agency are facing. So this was about a couple of years ago, one of the op-eds in New York Times, again, talking about that the challenge of superbugs is quintessentially connected to the impact of war and conflict. There's another dimension, of course, in this case, connected both to superbugs and COVID-19, and that is a sort of lack of regulation in farms. And this is again a picture of pig farms in China, but similar issues are in Brazil, or in India, and to a certain extent in Middle America as well, in Iowa and elsewhere. This is a picture that I took myself of a place where antibiotics were being mixed with the feed in Pakistan, where antibiotics are used freely in animal feed in one of the largest buffalo colonies in the world. I want to end with a couple of thoughts. This is a picture that I took myself working last year at refugee camps in northern Uganda at the border between Uganda and South Sudan. People who come with infections in this part of the world get antibiotics, but not the ones that they need, the ones that the center has. It doesn't matter what you need. If the center has one kind of antibiotic, that's the only one you get. And that level of inequity, that unfairness, drives challenges in sort of developing antibiotic resistance. It is neither fair nor is it right. But this is the reality in many, many, many parts of the world. And this is something that we have to think about. How do we address these things? Because neither superbugs nor viruses know any borders. And we shouldn't just work on these to protect ourselves and say, well, eventually it comes to America, that's why we should protect ourselves. We should do it because it's wrong, because these people deserve good healthcare. And I think engineers have a responsibility to think about these, but they will not be able to do that unless they really go and work and sort of understand the challenges on the ground. So there is the present and the future of antibiotics and antibiotic resistance. I think the future is uncertain. There are moments when I think it's dark, and there are other opportunities that I have had in working with remarkable people like the ones who are listening today, when I think the future is bright. The present doesn't look all that great though. But for me, going through both the history of science and sort of technology development has told me one thing, that the reasons we got into this challenge are going to be the ones that allow us to take us out of it. So is there hope? The answer is yes, there is hope. And that hope rests on humility. What I mean by that is a recognition that we will not be able to get out of this using purely engineering or economics or law or sort of new discovery. We all have a role to play, every single one of us. So it's a call to my engineering students and those who are present here to work across disciplines. And here I don't mean just interdisciplinary in the sense of bio and bioengineering. I mean biology and bioengineering and public health, working with philosophers and ethicists and historians and anthropologists and economists, because all of us were responsible in creating this mess, and we all have to work together to address this. Me first, my country first, my nation first, build a bigger wall, whatever your phrase is not going to get us out of this, rather it's going to get it much worse. So as long as there's humility and a pushback against hubris, I think we'll be okay. So I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zaman. You are doing incredible research, and thank you so much for sharing this with us. I also want to especially thank you for shining light on our female STEM trailblazers. Now, Dr. Zaman has been very modest. I'm going to do a shameless plug for his new book. Congratulations. It's called The Biography of Resistance, the epic battle between people and pathogens. So for any of my Tandon students who have joined me today, if you are interested in this subject matter and would like a gift from Dean Farrington, let me know. Email me today. My email is going to be in the chat, and let me know. I'd be happy to share Dr. Zaman's book with you. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Zaman.
Thank you.
Now, the next Tandon student to present is going to be Carolyn Barker. Carolyn, please join us to introduce our next presenter.
I think it's actually Angel that would be presenting next.
Yes. My apology, yes. Angel Martinez is going to introduce our next presenter, John Van Dyke.
So, hi, my name is Angel Martinez. I am a second year at Tandon studying mechanical and aerospace engineering. I currently serve on the board of the Society of Professional Hispanic Engineers as Community Outreach Chair, and I am honored to introduce John Van Dyke as our next speaker. John Van Dyke joined Urban Green Council in 2018 as its first ever CEO. He capped a 25-year career as Chief Sustainability Officer for United Technologies Corporation, a Fortune 45 global leader in the building, aerospace, and food refrigeration industries. He also serves as a visiting scientist at Harvard University T.H. Chan School of Public Health and an adjunct professor at the University of Connecticut School of Business. John is the founding chair of the Corporate Advisory Board for the World Green Building Council, a former board chair of Urban Green and co-author of the book Food Foolish.
Thank you, Angel, for that great introduction. I want to thank Dean Farrington for including me on this terrific panel. Congratulations on this event and its longevity. I can see why. I also want to thank Dean Farrington for helping Urban Green. We are embarking in a direction to see how we can use our expertise in the green building and sustainability space to focus it on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and particularly how we can achieve equity and sustainability. And Dean Farrington is helping us think through a major initiative that we plan in this area next year. So I certainly appreciate that. I'm going to share my screen and take the discussion in a little bit of a different direction to talk about buildings and why they matter, and particularly why they will matter for your careers in STEM. And let me see, this is always a scary moment for me. Okay, I think I got that right. I'm going to talk a little bit about my organization and what Urban Green is all about. Then I'm going to share with you why buildings matter when it comes to sustainability and what we're doing about it in New York, and finally wrap up on why this is relevant for today's discussion. At Urban Green, our mission is to transform buildings for a sustainable future in New York City and around the world. What that means practically is we work on reducing the carbon footprint of buildings. We do that in 4 ways. The first is that we convene. We're known for bringing parties together to solve big problems. We've been doing this throughout the course of our 18-year history. For example, Mayor Mike Bloomberg appointed Urban Green to develop the city's resiliency plan after Superstorm Sandy. That's the type of the work we do. In that exercise, we brought together 300 experts just over the course of a year to develop that plan that was passed by the city council. So we're known for convening and bringing parties together. We're also known for our research. Typically, when you bring parties together, you need data to solve problems. And so the data that the research that we do fills data needs to drive conversation and to inform policies. And we release several research reports a year, and you can see them on our website. Once we have the data from that research, it usually leads to solutions, which gets us to advocacy. We work very closely with our partners in city government, in the mayor's office and at the city council, to enact smart policies related to climate change and buildings and sustainability and resiliency. And in fact, we've had over 70 pieces of legislation passed that have either been directly proposed by Urban Green or touched by Urban Green or supported by Urban Green in some form or another. And then finally, once the laws are passed, people need to know about them. And so we do a lot of training and education, whether that be training on the new energy code in New York City and New York State that we provide. In the last code cycle, we trained 5,000 architects and engineers on that code. We've just started a new energy code and we're ramping that up. Or we do green building training for the building trades around the country and reach over 50 cities across the US and Canada in doing that. Now, we do all that because buildings matter. We can all relate to buildings. We are all sitting in a building right now, is my guess. In New York City, buildings emit nearly 70% of all carbon in our city, with transportation just under 30%. Now, this isn't the typical carbon budget that you'd see for many cities around the United States, but it certainly is for large urban centers. London or Hong Kong or Singapore might have a similar profile. The reason here is because our transportation system is relatively carbon efficient in New York City. Last year, there were 2.5 billion riders on the MTA and subways, and that keeps the transportation pie smaller than most cities. So buildings are left and they play an outsized role, which means they play not only an outsized role in our carbon emissions, they play an outsized role in solving how we can lower those emissions to get to a lower carbon and better climate future. Now, we have a lot at stake in New York. New York has $3 trillion of insured coastal properties that are vulnerable to climate change. I'll say that again, $3 trillion. That's twice the GDP of Canada. So it is in our enlightened self-interest in the buildings community to find a way to address climate change, because it is those very assets that are at risk. And unfortunately, this isn't just theory, it's reality. New York Harbor is up a full foot in the last century. Sea level rise is disproportionately higher in this part of the world than others. And we only needed to see an event like Superstorm Sandy 8 years ago, which left a $20 billion bill to understand the firsthand effects of climate change, rising sea levels, and the threats that are in front of us. So we did something about it. We pulled together a broad coalition in one of our convenings to provide backbone and the architecture and the recommendations that form New York City's new climate law, which is called the Climate Mobilization Act. That was passed last year. This is a historic law in the sense that for the very first time, it places carbon caps on buildings, meaning that starting in 2024 and then in 2030, buildings mandatorily have to stay below a cap of carbon. Covers 50,000 buildings in New York City, and it delivers the largest carbon reduction of any city in the world. This is a quick example to show how it works. These are those 50,000 buildings. We have 1 million buildings in New York City, by the way. If we draw the line at 25,000 square feet and above, you get to a population of 50,000. Those 50,000 represent 60% of the floor area and about half of all the emissions of buildings. So it's not everything, but it's a big first step from just a subsample of that 50,000. These are those 50,000 buildings plotted by their carbon intensity. So the further you are on the right, the more carbon you emit. And what the law says is in 2024, the 20% most intensively emitting buildings have to do something. So that's 10,000 buildings that have to take action. And then in 2030, the cap tightens to capture 75% of all buildings in New York, or that covered population. It's a simple metric. It's a carbon per square foot cap by 10 different building types. And this is dramatically changing the real estate industry and the buildings industry in New York City. Now, we're working hard on an innovative solution in a way that buildings can approach this new cap, and that's actually carbon trading between buildings. It really hasn't been tried at this scale. And so we are now working with the city, which is doing a study on how buildings could trade carbon. The way it could work is, as this diagram shows, building A on the left might be able to get below its cap, the cap that it's assigned, and get 3 units below its cap. It ought to have a financial incentive to do that, because building B may not be able to get below its cap just by the nature of the operation of the building. And so it's 3 units out of compliance. Well, if building A can sell its excess carbon reduction to building B to come into compliance, it would allow the law to actually work while achieving its environmental goals. Right now, the only track left for building B is to pay a fine, which I understand if you're out of compliance, you pay a fine. But in this case, if a building pays a fine, we don't get the carbon reduction that we need in New York City. So this is the way that we ensure carbon reduction. Now, why do I say all of that? Now, what does this have anything to do with STEM? And my answer to that is it has everything to do with STEM. These are enormous problems that we're facing, and my previous panelists have really done a nice job framing them. These are global problems we have when it comes to climate change and sustainability that have been elusive to solve. And, you know, I'll paraphrase President Obama, who said that we are the first generation to live with the effects of climate change and the last generation who can do something about it. That clearly applies to students today. And to solve these problems, we need more people with a STEM background to help us think through the technicalities of how we can address climate change. How can we address climate change in the building environment? Just in this one subset that I've shown, we need more people in math. We need more people in science. We need more people in engineering for sure to help us think through these issues. So your generation is going to be very key to this. STEM is going to be very key. And then finally, I just want to say how key diversity will be. We need not only the diversity of discipline, we need the diversity of background of people in these disciplines. You know, I'll just be honest and say my generation hasn't done a super job in helping to solve these problems. We need your generation and a more diverse generation in your generation to help bring the greatest thoughts and the greatest solutions forward so that we can get to the brighter environmental future I know that is in front of us. So thank you again for including me, and I'm happy to answer any questions during the Q&A period.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you for the work that you're doing. I look forward to working with Urban Green. It'll be very interesting to see, looking down the road 5 years, 10 years, the work that you're doing is so impactful. And this is really to our students. John is not only a leader in this field, but he's also a convener, which is really critical. He's a convener and an educator, bringing companies in to really push this agenda, which is critical. So, and he's very uniquely positioned in this way. So again, thank you for sharing this with our students, and especially connecting the dots for the need for engineers in these areas to problem solve for healthier New York and beyond. So now I am going to invite Carolyn Barker. I brought her on too early. Carolyn Barker. Hi, Carolyn.
Hi. Hi.
Tandon student is going to introduce our next speaker and also the one after, but I'm going to come back after you introduce Crystal. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Farrington. Hi, I'm Caroline. I'm currently a junior pursuing a bachelor's in computer science at Tandon School of Engineering. I serve on the e-board for the NYU chapter for the Society of Women Engineers as vice president, and I'm pleased to introduce Crystal Hansley. So Crystal Hansley is the founder and chief executive officer of WeSolar. She began the role of CEO in May 2020, and as CEO, Crystal brings affordable and accessible community solar energy to under-resourced communities who historically faced environmental injustices. She also assists commercial properties with energy efficiency. WeSolar launched in Baltimore and plans to expand through the Mid-Atlantic. In Maryland, lawmakers recently passed legislation that states 50% of its electricity must come from renewable energy sources by 2050. Crystal is a distributor who advocates the communities of color and low-income communities be included in this shift and have a healthy environment in the future. Before founding We Solar, Crystal was the Director of Government and Community Relations for Neighborhood Sun, a leading solar energy enterprise in Maryland from 2018 to 2020. In this role, Crystal was the liaison between solar energy developers and families with low to moderate income in Baltimore. Hansley built organic relationships with city leaders and increased the number of subscribers to Maryland's Community Solar Pilot Program that allocates energy savings credits toward their electricity bills. In turn, she helped thousands of families save hundreds annually on their utility bills. Before transitioning to the solar industry, Crystal worked on Capitol Hill, where she served as Community Affairs Program Manager for the U.S. Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton and Program Manager for the Senate Democratic Diversity Initiative at the Office of Majority Leader Harry Reid. She was chosen as the 2010 Howard University Legislative Fellow at Senator Harry Reid's office. Crystal is on the steering committee for Baltimore's People Climate Movement, on the board of directors for the Maryland Baptist Aged Home, on the board of directors for Dads United organization, and on the board of directors for Freedom Advocates Celebrating Ex-Offenders. Crystal is a proud alumna of Howard University, where she received a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science, and of the Dr. Susan S. McKinney Secondary School of the Arts in Brooklyn, New York. She is a daughter of Brooklyn, New York, but is grateful for the village of community leaders in Baltimore who welcomed her with open arms. Crystal is a classically trained pianist, opera singer, and a proud dog mom to her mini poodle Jade. Welcome, Crystal Hansley.
Hi, thank you so much for this wonderful invite. I'm honored to be able to speak with you all today about my company that I recently launched this year in the middle of this pandemic-induced recession. I think in order to be an entrepreneur, you have to be a little delusional with mixed with optimism. And so I saw an opportunity in this space and a need. And so I really like the Dean's theme this year, inclusive innovation. And I believe that that fits We Solar's brand, We Solar's mission to a T. And I would love to talk about that today. Let me share my screen. And so, yeah, a little bit about me. I was raised in Brooklyn, New York. I transitioned to the DMV area for college, and I worked on Capitol Hill. After leaving college, I come from a political science government background, so I'm a little anomaly in that sense, where I don't have a STEM background, and I, saw a need through the policy in the government realm as far as how I can be helpful in using my connections as also my industry experience to fill this need within the solar industry, and in particular the community solar space, which I think is a cool niche market that's growing at 5 times the rate of the traditional solar model, and how that really embodies inclusive innovation as far as distributing equity, as well as some of the resources and benefits of renewable energies, particularly solar. So I've been in this industry for about 3 years. I don't have a STEM background. So I think just coming from you all, where you guys are sitting, you have a huge advantage in this space, and also particularly just focusing on the entrepreneur side. So yes, I need a lot of mechanical engineers. I plan on bringing at least 10 megawatts of solar, community solar online to underrepresented communities this year in my first year. And so my very first thing that I need to do for any particular contract is look at the host site, do an assessment, and I have to call on my mechanical engineers that use the AutoCAD software. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that, but that's like the software that shows like the financing, the load of a system, and so pretty much community solar is this new way of distributing solar energy through a virtual credit, in a sense that you don't really need to have a traditional solar system on your roof, or you don't have to be a homeowner to access solar energy through virtual net metering credits. And this model allows 80% of US homes to receive solar energy in like a new inclusive way. And particularly, this meant a lot for me. Growing up in New York, I come from, just humble beginnings. I'm the first generation to graduate from college in my family. And I was also raised by my grandparents. The late 80s was not particularly friendly in the inner cities in Brooklyn, New York. So my family, just was what was going on in the crack epidemic, and it kind of just like decimated my family. So there was always this question of like why things are the way that they are, and that kind of just, and being under my grandparents, they were all community organizers. I just had this question in my heart, like, how can I solve the poverty? How can I solve the crime, and why things are the way that they are, and how did it get this way? So I really like one of the professors said, like, the intersections, the cross disciplines, and how like the engineering meets with the politics and the government leaders and the community leaders. We are all needed to really solve some of these major issues like climate change, and the equity issues that's happening in our society. And I believe like community solar and We Solar is a great intersection between environmental injustice, racial injustice. Right now, 80% of the solar executive solar jobs are white. And so being a Black woman executive in this space, I feel like there's a lot of, there's a lot for me to contribute to the space, but also serve as a liaison for students like yourself who want to get into this field, and pass on the baton and, create just a roadmap or the mentors, and be a mentor to anyone that may see this particular model or this niche and say, hey, I want to, roll up my sleeves and dive in to help expand this industry, because it is new and it's growing fast. And so how does it work? You need state legislation. So in Maryland in 2015, they passed the Community Solar Act, which was a part of their larger climate bill. And Sierra Club, they were aiming to be 50% renewable by 2050. And out of that, we were able to carve out a 7-year community solar pilot program. Similarly, in New York, there's a great Volt Solar organization did a great job, and also the Sierra Club in New York, as far as framing the community solar pilot program in the state, and it's up and running. And so I definitely am talking to some developers in New York and New Jersey to bring We Solar online within this year. And so once the legislation is passed, the key thing as far as how some of these pilot programs were able to pass their state house is this part right here. Community solar allows low-income families to receive some of these benefits. And the 7-year community solar pilot program in New York, this is the reason why I started We Solar, because what I was noticing in the industry under a former company, a lot of these bills wouldn't have passed if they didn't include the low to moderate income mandate. Oh, here it is. Incentivize solar companies to provide service to low to moderate income customers. And so once you're building a solar farm, meaning you already secured the permit, the developer, the financing, you must have a certain amount of low to moderate income home subscribers in your farms. And so what I was noticing, that there was a major disconnect as far as how many low to moderate income homes were actually aware of this pilot program, as well as on the retail side or the customer side, but in the business supply chain. So there weren't a lot of there weren't community solar companies in this space that was minority or women owned. And I'm like, this legislation wouldn't have passed if it wasn't meant for low to moderate income, but those who were serving the low to moderate income groups for community solar wasn't represented in the business model. And so, yes, I was one of the first pioneers in Maryland to bring the first low to moderate income community solar farm in Maryland under my previous organization that started as a B Corp, which is great. But I still saw where there was major disconnects between the developers, the engineers, the financing, and then also bringing the load, like who takes care of the load, the subscribers. And obviously, if you have what I was noticing, it was the energy gap as well. I just did an interview with Grist and I said, yeah, you have these community solar pilot programs, and one side of the farm, in theory, is open household. So you don't have to have an income. You can just go on the We Solar site or any community solar company site and sign up. But if you're focusing on low to moderate income, folks didn't believe that the pilot program was real. They thought it was a scam because of previous energy companies that preyed and targeted low-income communities, promising them energy savings, but the energy savings will only last for about 2 to 3 months, and then their grandmother, aunts, or their homes would notice this dramatic increase on their bills. And so even though this is a legitimate program that actually guarantees savings that was meant for low to moderate income homes, and I started in Baltimore, Maryland, because I'm like, hey, I want to go to the communities that really can use these savings and also create the outreach and teach about green and being renewable. And, that's when I joined the Baltimore People's Climate Movement. And yeah, on the ground, it's a lot of work. And what I saw was what I believed, that, there was a lot of trust issues. And so I was working with a great organization, but I'm like, folks really need to see me in leadership. I have to branch off and start We Solar to kind of like fill those gaps in the supply chain, especially when this legislation and these business opportunities were meant for communities. Like, I come from a similar background. And so if you want to be inclusive and effective, those who are at the top need to reflect the demographic that you're targeting and you're trying to uplift. And so this is, in theory, how the community solar model works. Let me just move this. It's super easy to understand. We build the off-site solar farm, which powers the local utility in New York. I believe it's Con Edison. And once we subscribe, a household, this is the bulk of We Solar's part here. If I'm a co-developer, then I'll come in on the early stages. But if I'm just managing the subscriber allocation and being a liaison between the developers and the customers, I need a chief technology officer that help build my own custom software to manage this process of making sure my subscribers have the amount of solar credits delivered to their utility bill, and also that we're in coordination with any particular industry standards. So how Con Edison would move and want just the logistics done will be different from how another utility will like it, or based off of that state law. And so, yeah, like, this is a really cool way for everyone to be included in the just transition and receive solar power, and not just homeowners or the middle class. And so when we talk about inclusive innovation, virtual net metering or community solar embodies that. And that's the mission of We Solar. I'm trying to go to the next slide. Okay. So yeah, I went over that. Some of the biggest benefits: you don't have to own a home, no installation. So New York, it's a lot of apartment dwellers. So you should definitely check out if your parents are paying an electric bill, or if you're paying an electric bill, tell them to sign up. New York has a community solar pilot program online, and you know, if it's free. That's another thing. It doesn't cost much or anything to join one of these solar pilot programs. So community solar creates economic resilience for low to moderate income households, savings for those who bear the brunt end of environmental injustice, meaning for a long time, you know, the lower household income families weren't able to really receive solar power. And also, we know that these are the same communities that have higher asthma rates, and in this case, they're being affected by COVID at higher rates that we spoke about in the previous presentations. And so this is all interconnected. And so if you have families or communities, these frontline communities that are dealing with environmental injustice at a disproportionate rate, then they should also, we should also figure out as innovators how we can flip the script and, you know, figure out ways for them to also receive some of the savings and benefits. And community solar does just that. So the average low to moderate income resident will save about $200 if they're receiving 25% off their utility bill a month, which is great. So imagine if you, and it's not just low income, it's moderate income as well. So just for reference, a family of 4 that makes $100,000, you can actually, you know, receive, you know, 25% off. So I like the fact that they took that into consideration, that it wasn't, you know, the middle class could also benefit as well as the working class. And so once a family switches or sign up for community solar, the average American household, you know, uses around 5 metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions, and that's how much is offset. And so that's the equivalent of 5,335 pounds of coal that's not burned. So it really has a huge environmental impact in a positive way if you're just switching to solar or community solar. And as you can see, community solar is the hottest vertical in the solar space, looking at their 5-year growth. And so if any of like the, you know, students that's looking into mechanical engineering or industrial engineering, if you obviously know about the traditional solar companies, look at the up and coming community solar companies, because we are growing at a 5-time faster rate. And yeah, I'm here for any questions that you may have. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so very much, Crystal. Crystal is the best example of entrepreneurial innovation, and also recognizing the need. And what did I talk about? Intention in the beginning. It's about recognizing populations that historically have not been served. So again, just thank you and kudos. And what an inspiring story. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
So now I know in the interest of time, we talked about doing Q&A. At the end, we're still going to make sure that we respond to all of the questions that you've been sending to us by email, but I do want to quickly bring on our last presenter. And then once again, we will make sure to address every question that you've sent our way by email. We'll make sure that the presenters respond to you. So now I'd like to bring Caroline back, and she's going to introduce our last presenter.
Hi, so yeah, Julia Steynovich is an assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at the Tandon School of Engineering and the Center for Data Science. She is a recipient of the NSF Career Award and of an NSF CRA-CI Fellowship. Julia's research focused on responsible data management and analysis practices, on operationalizing fairness, diversity, transparency, and data protection in all stages of the data acquisition and processing lifecycle. She established the Data Responsibility Consortium and serves on the New York City Automated Decision Systems Task Force by appointment by Mayor de Blasio. In addition to data ethics, Julia works on management and analysis of preference data and on querying large evolving graphs. She holds a master's and PhD degrees in computer science from Columbia University and a bachelor's in computer science and mathematics and statistics from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Welcome, Professor Steynovich.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. And I know that we're out of time. And so I'm just going to try to be as brief as I can possibly. Okay, so please confirm that you're able to see my slides.
We can see.
Okay, thanks. Today, my name is Julia Steynovich, and today I will be telling you about some of the work that my colleagues and students and I are doing at the newly established Center for Responsible AI at NYU. And of course, the topic of this presentation is on artificial intelligence, AI, and as will become immediately clear, this work relates directly to the topic of this event, and that is diversity in STEM. So let's just start by saying that AI, artificial intelligence, is great. It's all the rage. The convergence of unprecedented data collection capabilities, enormous computational power, and broad acceptance of data collection and analysis as a way to move society forward is offering us tremendous opportunities to do good. We can accelerate scientific discovery in a variety of areas, ranging from astrophysics to medicine. We can boost innovation in a myriad of ways, from self-driving cars to advertisement targeting and back. And we can also improve how society functions. We can improve how we govern by making sure that resource distribution that governments take care of is done more equitably, and by bringing greater transparency and accountability to government operations. And perhaps most importantly, we can get AI to do all of our work so that we can just sit back and relax at the beach. Jokes aside, at least for a second, and to make our discussion more concrete, I would like to focus on a particular use of artificial intelligence, or AI, and that is in scope of automated hiring systems. The hiring process is often depicted as a funnel that you can see on this slide. It's a sequence of data-driven, algorithm-assisted steps in which a series of decisions culminates in job offers to some and rejections to others. And very often, these decisions are based on data and are carried out with the help of algorithms, including also artificial intelligence. This process starts with employers sourcing candidates, for example, by placing job ads. Next, during the screening stage, employers assess candidates by analyzing their experience, skills, and characteristics, for example, what they can find on the applicants' resumes. Then, through interviewing applicants, employers continue their assessment in a more direct fashion. Background checks will follow. And finally, during the selection step, employers will make final hiring and compensation determinations. And once again, importantly, data and algorithms, predictive analytics in particular, are used during all of these stages ubiquitously. As was stated by Jenny Yang, former commissioner of the US Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, automated hiring systems act as modern gatekeepers to economic opportunity. And now some bad news. One of the earliest indications that there's cause for concern came in 2015 with the results of the Ad-Fisher study out of Carnegie Mellon University. The authors ran an experiment and found that ads for high-paying jobs were shown far more frequently to men than to women. This brings back memories of the time when it was legal to advertise jobs by gender in newspapers. This practice was outlawed in the United States in 1964, but it persists in the online ad environment today. Advancing to the next stage of the hiring pipeline, resume screening, in late 2018, it was reported that Amazon's AI recruiting tool that was developed with the stated goal of increasing workforce diversity, in fact, did the opposite thing. The system taught itself that male candidates were preferable to female candidates. It penalized resumes that included the word women's, as in women's chess club captain, and downgraded graduates from two all-women's colleges. Other examples of discrimination include shutting out people suffering from mental illness, such as depression or bipolar disorder, on the basis of online personality tests, even if they have the right skills for the job. And another example later yet in the hiring pipeline during background checks was surfaced by Latanya Sweeney, a computer science professor on the faculty at Harvard, who showed that Googling for African-American sounding names, such as Latanya, is more likely to trigger ads suggestive of a criminal record than when Googling with white-sounding names like Kristen, even if you control for whether an individual in fact has a criminal record. So to summarize, despite their potential to improve efficiency for both employers and job applicants, automated hiring tools are raising numerous concerns. And these concerns pertain, broadly speaking, to the unfairness in the decisions that are made by these systems, which we denote by discrimination, and to the unfairness in the process by which these decisions are made. And these are sometimes called due process concerns or violations. Very often, discrimination and due process violations are linked to the term bias, and this is a term that we will revisit in a couple of minutes. There are also concerns about whether these tools actually work, whether they are picking up useful signal from the data or are an elaborate coin flip at best. As Arvind Narayanan, a computer science professor at Princeton, puts it, are these tools AI snake oil? In the complex ecosystem in which automated hiring tools are commissioned, developed, and used, we must ask ourselves, who is responsible for making sure that these tools are built and used appropriately? Who is responsible for catching and mitigating discrimination and due process violations, and for controlling the proliferation of snake oil under the fancy label of data science and AI? And what my culpability lineup shows is that I think that we all are responsible, both as professionals in STEM fields and as individuals. And this is why I'm speaking to all of you about this today. So in response to the question about responsibility, we've been seeing attempts to regulate the use of data-driven algorithmic tools, such as those that make part of the hiring funnel. And so I would like to bring to your attention the proposal for a law that is currently being considered in New York City and that would regulate the use of automated employment decision tools in the city. If passed, this law will apply to the use of these tools both in government and in industry. It will prohibit the sale of such tools if they were not the subject of an audit for bias. The law also requires, very importantly, to disclose to candidates when such tools were used to assess their candidacy for employment, meaning to disclose to people that a machine, an algorithm, was used to evaluate them rather than a human. And also it will be required to disclose what specific job qualifications or characteristics were used by the tool in the screening. So let's discuss very quickly the first aspect of this proposed bill, and that is auditing these tools for bias. Bias is a term that is used very often these days to explain what's wrong with automated decisions, but it remains poorly understood. And so I'm going to try and explain this term, unpack this term for you a little bit today. So what do we mean by bias? Our meaning of this term is not in the traditional sense that is used by statisticians who say that a model that I'm depicting in the middle here is biased if it does not summarize the data that you can see on the left correctly. So what I'm showing you here is a data set, for example, of past performance on the job, and then a machine learning box, an AI box in the middle. This is a predictive analytic, and this analytic is outputting a classification decision. In our domain, this would mean the tool helps us decide whom to hire and whom not to hire, for example. So our meaning of this term bias is not the statistical meaning that says that this model in the middle does not summarize the data correctly. Instead, what we mean is that the data itself somehow does not represent the world correctly. So let's unpack this further. Data, the way that I like to think about this, is an image of the world. It's mirror reflection. When we think about societal bias in the data, we interrogate this reflection. One interpretation of bias in the data is that the reflection is distorted. For example, we may systematically underrepresent or overrepresent particular parts of the world, or otherwise distort the readings in the data. It is important to keep in mind that a reflection, this data set, cannot know whether it's distorted. That is, data alone cannot tell us whether it's a distorted reflection of a world and in what way that distortion arises, or what does it even represent. Another interpretation of bias in the data is that even if we were able to take a perfect reflection of the world in the data, it would still be a reflection of the world such as it is, and not necessarily of how it could or should be. And so the points that I would like to make here are, first of all, like I already said, data doesn't know whether it's distorted and for what reason. A data set cannot tell us whether it's a distorted reflection of a perfect world, a perfect reflection of a distorted world, or if these distortions compound. The assumed or externally verified nature of these distortions has to be explicitly stated. And importantly, it's not up to data or algorithms, but rather up to people, up to us, individuals, groups, and society at large, to come to consensus about whether the world is how it could or should be, or if it needs to be improved. And if so, how we should go about improving it. My final point based on this metaphor is that changing the reflection does not necessarily change the world. If the reflection itself is used to make important decisions, for example, whom to hire or what salary to offer to an individual being hired, then compensating for the distortions is worthwhile. But the mirror metaphor only takes us so far. We have to work much harder, usually going far beyond simply technical solutions to propagate the changes back into the world, not simply brush up the reflection. So I'm actually going to stop here, more or less. I want to say that there are other components to the work that we do, to the proposed bill that New York City is considering. One of these components is enabling public disclosure. And an interesting metaphor here and an interesting gadget that we've been building are nutritional labels that would explain to job applicants why a decision was reached to not hire them and what they can do to improve their chances in the future, or what they can do to challenge this decision. The main takeaway that I'd like to leave with you is that we need to really think about the issues at the interface of technology and society very carefully to be able to arrive at a nuanced understanding that moves the conversation beyond the harmful extremes of techno-optimism that I'm depicting on the left, and that is a belief that technology can single-handedly fix deep-seated societal problems like structural discrimination in hiring, and techno-bashing that I'm depicting on the right, and that is a belief that any attempt to embed ethics and legal compliance in technical systems, such as those used in hiring, will essentially amount to fair washing, and so we shouldn't even attempt to do this. And an important thread that runs through my conversation here, of course, is that we all are responsible, both as actors in the space of building technology, but also as citizens, to make sure that we think carefully about what technology is doing and that we challenge its position, that we challenge these design decisions. So I mentioned that I direct the newly established Center for Responsible AI at NYU, where our mission is to build technology that is rooted in people. And in addition to research, we also pursue educational goals. So I teach a course on responsible data science that is offered to technical, so computer science or data science students at NYU. And that will be, I've been teaching a graduate version of this course, and an undergraduate version will begin to be offered this spring. So I encourage you to take a look at the course. We also do public engagement and public education initiatives. For example, we're developing a course called AI for the People in collaboration with Queen's Public Library. And finally, the images that you've been seeing today are based on a comic book series, of which the first volume has been recently released. And yesterday we released this volume also in Spanish. It's fully accessible with a screen reader, and I encourage you to take a look. And please stay in touch if you'd like to find out more about these initiatives and to learn how you can be involved. So I'm going to skip this. This is a very quick plug that the Center for Data Science at NYU, with which I'm also affiliated, is working to encourage participation of undergraduates from underrepresented groups all the way at the PhD level. So please check out this program that was just established recently as a grassroots initiative. And thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. And thank you for your flexibility. I know that we went a little over and that you stayed with us, but this was so important for you to share this. And just know that Student Affairs is going to continue to support you. We want to help to get the word out to our Tandon community. So thank you again, Julia.
Thanks.
So now, as I mentioned before, we're going to make sure, I know a few of you had questions, we're going to make sure that our faculty and our presenters respond to all of them. I just want to thank all of you again for joining us, and just to say that we are certainly looking forward to our remaining 2 events. The first one this evening is called Reimagining the Building Industry. We're going to take a close look at how architects and engineers collaborate. We'll be featuring one of our Tandon alums, Christine Pembroke. So we're very excited that she's coming back, and she's going to be talking about inclusive innovation. She's doing management consulting now, but really got started in the construction industry. So she has a lot of interesting stories to tell. And then our final closing event tomorrow, Thursday at 6, is going to feature U.S. National Laboratories. And I don't know how many of you know, we have about 17 U.S. laboratories across the country who are passionately committed to recruiting engineering students. This is the first time that we've had a panel of U.S. lab representatives. So please, if you have not signed up for it, there are still virtual seats. Come learn more about these important career opportunities, both for summer placement and full-time placement, and they recruit for all majors. All right, again, to our presenters, thank you so much. Thank you to my team, Randy and Alethea. We had some glitches, you know, it is a virtual world, and thank you for your patience with us, and just hoping that all of you got a lot, and I certainly did, out of the content that was presented. Such an incredible range of content for all of our student community. Thank you so much again to our presenters. Everyone have a great day.
Thanks, Anita.